Well, hello everyone. I'm glad you could join me again for another one of my podcasts. I'm on got a good interview today with a gentleman who has got a great story to tell. And well, I say a great story, but it's a sad story, in my opinion, with what's going on with the politics here in the state of Tennessee. So today, my guest is Mark Pulliam, and I'm glad you can join me, Mark. So anyway, if you don't mind, go ahead and tell us a little bit about yourself and start into what's going on with your election.
Okay, thanks for having me on, Charles. So I am a resident of Blount County, which is just south of Knoxville. It's in District 2, corresponds with State Senate District 2. And I've been a Republican all my adult life in every state that I've ever lived. And I have not always lived in Tennessee. I moved here about 3 years ago. And prior to moving here, I lived in Texas, and before that, California, and before that, Texas again, and have been very active in Republican politics in all of those places. And so, like a lot of people, like probably most of your listeners, I'm very concerned about the direction of the country, the things that are happening in Washington, D.C., and felt that it was really critically important to do whatever I can do at the local level to make the Republican Party strong and to keep conservative policies in effect here in Tennessee. And so in June, early June, I received notice from a Knoxville activist that I'm acquainted with that the state executive committee elections, which would be on the August 4th ballot, in many cases throughout the state didn't have anybody running. And the deadline had come and gone to qualify on the ballot, yet in 5 or 6 cases, nobody had bothered to try to get on the ballot, and therefore nobody was on the ballot. And this person suggested to me that if I knew of anybody who was interested and qualified to run as a write-in, that this might be an opportunity to sort of get involved in the state Republican Party. I'd heard of the SEC, but didn't really know a lot about it. And I'd heard of write-in elections, but didn't know anything about them. I said, well, let me look into it. So I spent a couple of days, going onto the Secretary of State website, doing a little bit of research. And sure enough, that for District 2, there was nobody running for the male seat. And just so your listeners know, the State Executive Committee is the body that actually governs the Tennessee Republican Party, and it consists of 66 people. And those 66 people represent each of Tennessee's 33 state Senate districts, and each district has a man and a woman on the SEC. Now, as it turns out, in District 2, there were 2 women running for the seat, for the women seat, but no men. And so I thought, well, why not? This sounds like a good opportunity to get involved. So what you have to do to be a write-in candidate is you have to file a piece of paper called a Certificate of Write-in Candidacy in the counties where you want to have your vote counted if somebody writes your name in. And you have to file this piece of paper 50 days before the election, which turned out to be June 15th. Now, District 2, which is redrawn as part of the reapportionment, now consists of Blount County, Monroe County, Polk County, and a small portion of Bradley County. I live in Blount County and had sort of driven through Monroe County, had never been to Polk County, and didn't even know where Bradley County was on a map. But I decided, well, if I'm going to do this, I need to file this piece of paper. So I drove down to Polk County, Monroe County and filed the piece of paper here in Blount County, all by noon on June 15th. And my candidacy was noteworthy because, as it turns out, very few people write them, run as write-ins. And as it turns out, I didn't know it at the time, nobody has ever been elected to the state executive committee as a write-in. So anyway, I have an activist group in Blount County that I run called the Blount County Conservative Coalition. I have a Facebook page called the Blount County Conservative Sentinel, and I promoted my candidacy on those platforms. My candidacy was written up in our local paper, the Maryville Daily Times. The administrator of elections was quoted in the paper saying that if Mark Pulliam gets a single vote, he will win, because nobody else had filed this piece of paper to have their name counted if somebody wrote it in. So I was really running against nobody. I was unopposed. And so lo and behold, after election day, August 4th, the administrator of elections here in Blount County reported that I'd gotten 300 write-in votes in Blount County, and I also picked up a couple of write-in votes in Polk County. So I had 302 votes, and I thought, well, if I could win this with a single vote, 302 votes is a landslide.
Yeah.
And so
Absolutely.
I thought, well, I'm in. I'm going to be on the SEC, and I was getting kind of excited about it, coming up with ideas of what I'm going to do, what my goals and objectives would be. And then I heard after the election, I heard through the rumor mill a couple of weeks after the election that people at the headquarters of the Tennessee Republican Party were claiming that my election violated the TRP bylaws, that write-ins are prohibited, and that my election was therefore invalid because it was literally prohibited by the bylaws. And that kind of concerned me because I thought I had done enough research going into this to think that it would work. So I went and I looked at the bylaws, and I couldn't find a single thing in the bylaws that address write-in candidates. In fact, the bylaws are silent. All it says is you have to be a resident of your district, and you have to win a majority of votes by bona fide Republicans voting in the election, which I had done. And so I sent an email to Scott Golden, who's the chairman of the Tennessee Republican Party, and said, I've heard rumors that there's concerns about my election, and I'd like to know what the concern is, if there is one. And he wrote back and said, well, yeah, we have serious concerns, and he raised several issues. One was that there was a question whether I was a bona fide Republican, in that I met the voting requirements in the bylaws. And just to digress a second, because Tennessee is an open primary state, Republicans can vote in Democrat primaries and vice versa. You do not declare your party affiliation when you register to vote. And so when the Republican Party is deciding who gets to run as a Republican on the ballot, there has to be a definition of what a Republican is, because anybody could claim to be a Republican. So they've come up with this test that called the bona fide standard, and you have to have voted in 3 out of the last 4 Republican primaries. And you have to have been active in the party, which is sort of a vague provision. So he said, we have, questions about whether you're bona fide, whether you're active. And we also have a question or concern because you did not pay a $100 registration fee at the time that you qualified as a write-in. And I knew that there was a registration fee, And for basically everybody that wanted to be on the Republican primary ballot had to pay a fee, and the amount of the fee depended on what office you were seeking. But it's the fee that you have to pay to have your name on the ballot. And as a write-in candidate, my name wasn't on the ballot. And I had a question whether it applied. So on June 15th, after I filed my certificate of write-in candidacy, I called the Nashville headquarters of the Tennessee Republican Party and spoke to Tyler Burns, the political director, and said, do I have to pay this $100 fee or not? He said, oh, no, it doesn't apply to you because you're a write-in. So I said, fine, and didn't think twice about it. But, here it is 2 weeks after the election, and the chairman of the party is telling me that I could be disqualified as a candidate for not paying it. So as soon as he told me that, I brought to his attention that I'd been told that I didn't have to pay the fee, but I went ahead and paid it. Immediately when he told me that, the fee applied and it was a problem, I went ahead and paid it. So I thought, well, then, that's going to solve these problems, but it didn't. And so ultimately what came to pass is that the chairman of the party sent out an email to the 66 members of the current state executive committee, and it's everybody is elected for a 4-year term and everybody gets elected at the same time. So the new SEC, the one that I thought I was being elected to, would assume office today, as it turns out. You'd be sworn in on September 15th, and the old SEC's term would end on September 15th. So he sends out an email to everybody that's on the old SEC, which also wears a hat as state primary board. And he said, we're going to have a call on September 6th. And the purpose of this call is going to be to determine whether Mark Pulliam was a bona fide candidate. And so it was going to be held by a Zoom call. So there was a Zoom call on September 6th. It lasted for about an hour and a half. And they brought up the voting record, my activity, the $100 registration fee. And then there were some additional issues that were brought up, including the claim that I was disqualified as a write-in candidate because I had not filed a certificate of write-in candidacy for the small portion of Bradley County that District 2 includes. And I'd never been to Bradley County, didn't know anybody in Bradley County, and since it only includes a small portion of Bradley County, I did not bother to drive down there. You have to file this certificate in person. So I didn't, but the statute, the Secretary of State guidelines, and the actual form all say that if you do not file the piece of paper in a county, all that means is that votes that you get, if any, in that county will not be counted. It doesn't say that you will be disqualified, and you're not disqualified.
Right.
So anyway, I listened to all of these things for 90 minutes, and I had an opportunity to respond to them. And I did respond to them, and I thought I responded to them cogently. And I, at the end of the 90 minutes, somebody called for the question, and the motion was, should my candidacy be rejected? And that motion carried by a 25-13 vote. Not all of the 66 members were on the call. There was only about 41, which was enough for a quorum. And then by the time that the vote took place, some of the people had dropped off. So we only had, 38 people vote, and I lost the motion. And they literally took the position that the election would be nullified by this SEC acting as the state primary board. And so I was, kind of flummoxed by this because, here I'd filed correctly as a write-in. There's no prohibition to write-ins. I got 302 votes. Secretary of State had certified those 302 votes. No other candidate was running. Nobody filed any kind of written objection. There was no formal challenge or contest to to my candidacy. This was simply somebody at the TRP, and I think it was Scott Golden. Maybe somebody had suggested to him that you ought to do whatever you can to get rid of Mark Pulliam, and they got 25 people on this state executive committee to go along with that. Now, some of the people on the SEC seem to be focused on the $100 registration fee, which I already paid, and which was told previously I didn't have to pay. Other people seem to be hung up on my voting record. And since I've only lived in Tennessee for 3 years, even though I have voted in every election, including every Republican primary election since I've lived here, that's been 3 primaries, but only 2 of those primaries are statewide primaries. One of them was a local primary. So there were people, and these are almost like amateur lawyers, who were arguing about this, said, okay, well, first of all, you haven't voted in 3 statewide primaries because only 2 of the 3 Republican primaries that you voted in are statewide primaries. So you're disqualified because you haven't voted in enough statewide Republican primaries.
Does the bylaws say it has to be a statewide primary?
Well, they're not the best written bylaws, but at one place it does say statewide Republican primary. But it also says that if you have moved, you have to have voted for those primaries in your county of residence. But it also says that if you have moved, then you look at your voting record in your previous county, or if you have moved from another state, in your previous state. And I had submitted to the SEC prior to this Zoom call a copy of my voting record in Tennessee and also my voting record in Texas, where I had voted in a whole bunch of elections, including the most recent Republican primaries in Texas. But people on this call were saying, well, that doesn't count. Your Texas voting record doesn't count. And I said, and it's true, that I have voted in every election, including every Republican primary election, since 1976, when I became eligible to vote. So long and short of it is that on September 6th, the SEC voted to nullify my election. And what this does is put it in the hands of the newly elected SEC to appoint somebody to fill a vacant seat. Now the seat is vacant because they've nullified my election to that seat. And so they will find somebody who lives in District 2, probably somebody who lives in Blount County, since we have most of the people. And I'm pretty certain that person is not going to be me, because if they wanted it to be me, they wouldn't have gone to such ridiculous lengths to cook up this whole objection to my election, and they wouldn't have gone to the extraordinary length of nullifying it. Now, I'm not an expert in these matters. I'm just a retired guy living in Blount County, trying to be a volunteer. This SEC position is a volunteer position. You don't get paid for it. So anyway, I do not understand what this objection is, but I have a pretty good idea what the motivation was. And some of the conservative members of the SEC telephoned me the day that this Zoom call was going to be held and told me about things that were being done behind the scenes, that phone calls were being made, emails were being circulated, and so forth. And one of the things that was being circulated was a letter from our county mayor here in Blount County, a man named Ed Mitchell, who is a Republican. And he said he was advocating that the SEC remove me or vote against me, nullify my election because I'm divisive. And if you don't live in Blount County, you probably do not understand what that means given the context. But what the context is is that as a conservative activist, I have from time to time criticized Ed Mitchell and his actions as county mayor. And I've been particularly critical of his support for a taxpayer subsidized Amazon warehouse that is currently under construction in Blount County. And there are some other things. And I guess ultimately I endorsed his opponent in the most recent Republican primary for county mayor. And so, we basically don't see eye to eye on some policy issues. And I supported the more conservative candidate for county mayor, and he's now trying to use my support for the more conservative candidate to retaliate against me and the voters who voted for me for the SEC position in District 2. So somebody's going to get appointed to this seat by the SEC. It's almost certainly not going to be me. And lost my train of thought there for a minute. But so what we've seen with so nobody's ever been elected to the SEC as a write-in candidate before. But what we have seen is the SEC being very aggressive about policing the Republican primary ballot. And in the 5th Congressional District, where there was a whole bunch of Republicans running because it's a safe seat now due to redistricting, they took out 3 of the people that wanted to run as Republicans in that primary on the grounds that they didn't meet this bona fide test. Taking some, and one of those candidates, Robbie Starbuck, challenged that in court, took it all the way up to the Tennessee Supreme Court and lost. But that's before the election, and nobody had voted for him. As far as I can tell, this is a unique situation in Tennessee that a candidate running for office without any opposition, with no opponent, qualifies for the write-in ballot under state law. Nobody's contending that I did not comply in all respects with state law, is therefore eligible to have his votes counted and have 300 people vote for him. And after the election and after the results have been certified, to have the Tennessee Republican Party retroactively determine that election is null and void, and instead appoint somebody that nobody voted for.
Yeah.
So this is a pretty significant issue, both in terms of the principle involved, and also you have to wonder what the agenda is in Nashville, that they're trying so hard to keep conservative off of the SEC. Why are they so interested in keeping conservatives off the SEC?
Well, that, and I really think they're really concerned with keeping conservatives out of any kind of office. As you know, part of the story, 2 years ago, we had a liberal supporting Democrat in Knox County by the name of Eddie Maness, who just weeks before he got a petition to run as a Republican in Knox County, had voted in the Democratic primary down there. He had a well-established record of supporting Democratic candidates financially, and he was actually put on the ballot by Scott Golden, the state executive chairman, the state executive committee chairman, after the state executive committee before the election voted not to allow him on the ballot because he wasn't a bona fide Republican. And Scott Golden overturned that and put him on the ballot himself. And then this guy gets elected because of Democrat crossover votes to wins the Republican primary, and then wins the election and goes to Nashville and embarrasses the Knox County delegation with his voting record.
Embarrassed the entire Tennessee Republican Party.
Yes, absolutely.
So, yeah, so this is the irony that Scott Golden is willing to bend over backwards and go against the wishes of the SEC to make sure that Eddie Manis is on the ballot, and so that he can get elected by Democrat crossover votes, where he's the epitome of a rhino and has such a disgraceful voting record in 2 years that even he, with his big wallet, knows that he could never get reelected and has to bail out. But now Scott Golden is bending over backwards in the opposite direction to keep a lifelong Republican off of the SEC, even though he has gotten 300 or more than 300 votes in the Republican primary.
With
So,
with no one running against you. I mean, as a write-in, this was, I mean, to me, what is one person such an issue for? And it stinks to high heaven what they've done here. And that's why when I heard your story, I said, I've got to help get this information out, because we've got to put light onto this, because light's the best disinfectant. And, we got
yeah,
to do this.
I agree. And so the one silver lining that's come out of this, and it's been sort of disappointing to me and disillusioning to me. I somewhat, maybe I was naive, but I expected the state executive committee would say, "Welcome aboard, Mark. We're glad to have found somebody willing to do this job that nobody else wanted." But instead, you would have thought that I was a serial killer. They just wanted to have nothing to do with me. But the silver lining is that the Tennessee Star newspaper and radio show, the Tennessee Star Report, has covered this in detail. Michael Patrick Leahy did an entire segment of his show explaining why these objections to my candidacy under the bylaws are incorrect. I've gotten the support. In fact, when my write-in candidacy was endorsed by the Tennessee Conservative News, Brandon Lewis,
Yep.
and they have covered this after the fact. Brandon Lewis sat in on the call, which was open to the public since it was a state primary board meeting, and he was just appalled at what he heard. That it was just it was childish and rude, and it was just very hostile. And then Gary Humble at Tennessee Stands has weighed in my defense, and so I've made some good friends as a result of this. But frankly, I didn't do this in order to make friends. I did this in order to get seated on the state executive committee, and I think a lot of grassroots conservatives like myself, they watch this play out, and it to some extent demoralizes them and makes them less enthusiastic, because they wonder, whose side is the Tennessee Republican Party really on? Are these people really welcoming grassroots conservatives, or are they trying to shun us?
They're none whatsoever. And like I told you before, I'm going to hit that in my next video. And they cannot stand conservative grassroots people. They detest it. And as you see what they're doing to Gary Humble with the state elections deal, to me, in my book, what they're doing to him is no more than what they're doing to Trump with the FBI.
Yeah.
It's just at a different level on the state. And I think people had better wake up and see. You think we're red to the roots here in Tennessee? No, sir, we're not.
Yeah. And in Texas, where I lived for 7 years before I moved to Tennessee, the Republican Party is a very grassroots oriented organization. They have state conventions where delegates are elected to attend. The the delegates draft and pass a platform, and quite literally, the party officers report to and are accountable to the grassroots, and therefore the candidates are more likely to pay attention to the grassroots. In Tennessee, and it's not just the way the party is structured. You know, we don't have an elected attorney general. One of the obstacles I had when I complained to the Secretary of State about, that the party is basically nullifying an election that the state of Tennessee held and certified, and they said, well, it's not our job to supervise primary elections. The Republican Party can do whatever it wants, and even to get that opinion validated or questioned by the state attorney general, a citizen in the state of Tennessee does not have a right to request an attorney general opinion. That it has to be a state official or a legislator request the opinion. So we don't get to vote for attorney general. We don't get to request legal opinions from our attorney general. We are literally treated as peons whose job it is to pay our taxes and otherwise, let the establishment do whatever it wants. And a lot of elected officials treat us the same way. Is that they come and kind of make some gestures at election time, but then once they get into office, they go to Nashville and just listen to the lobbyists and the PACs and forget about the voters they supposedly represent.
Absolutely. So, if I'm understanding you correctly, a state representative or a state senator can ask the attorney general for an opinion in this election of yours, correct?
That's what they say, and I have reached out to some representatives and senators, and so far have not found anybody willing to make this request on my behalf. And and then the other thing that the Secretary of State said is that you can always file a lawsuit. Well, it's one thing to volunteer for an unpaid job, and it's another to incur a lot of money in legal fees to obtain an unpaid job, particularly when a majority of the SEC has already made it clear that they really don't want to have anything to do with you. So I've also said, as in the wake of this nullification, that I would be willing to consider an appointment if the SEC wanted to appoint me to this vacancy. I don't have any great hope that I would be appointed, but I don't want to close that door because the 300 people that voted for me deserve, if the appointment is offered, I would be deserving them to turn that down. But I don't have a lot of hope in that regard. And so I guess what can your listeners do? One thing they could do, just as a matter of homework, is they could figure out which state senate district they live in, and then figure out who the SEC members are in their district. And those SEC members are going to be representing them for the next 4 years, and to maybe establish some kind of dialogue with those people, not necessarily in connection with my election or the nullification of my election, but just other things. So that, for instance, urge them to do things that would be good for the Republican Party in Tennessee, close the primary. There's no reason why Democrats should be voting in Republican primaries. And that is something that the Tennessee legislature could shut that down. And the more pressure we put on the SEC, the more pressure they would put on Republican legislators, and we might be able to see that happen. And the other thing is, I think the SEC should be encouraged to be more aggressive about helping the counties in Tennessee develop effective grassroots programs. That many Republican parties across the state of Tennessee at the county level, they don't have public meetings. They don't register voters. They don't recruit and develop candidates. They don't have a get out the vote program. They might hold a Lincoln Day dinner every year, but mostly what they do is support the incumbent Republicans. But we need to do more than that if we're going to withstand this progressive inroads that we are seeing take place in so many other states that are going from being red to purple and eventually blue. We do not want to be one of those states. And so we need to dig in now and start fighting back. And that fight needs to take place at the county level. And the counties need the support, guidance, and direction of the state Republican Party in order to become meaningful grassroots political organizations.
Yeah. And like you were saying there about closing the primaries, I agree with you, but you'll not get the Republican legislator to vote for that, simply because that means they're going to have conservative Republicans voting in that primary instead of people that have helped keep them in power.
Yep.
And that's a big thing here. So,
Yep.
and that's how, as we said, that's how Eddie Manus won his seat there. Yep. But, it wasn't going to help him keep it after he showed his true colors. Well, Mark, we're running up on about 40 minutes now.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you, Charles. Thank you for everything you do. And these podcasts are very informative. And I'm happy to have had the chance to kind of let your listeners know what the story is. And so I'm not giving up. I'm just going to kind of redirect my energies elsewhere. But we have to remain vigilant, because the country is at a very dire time right now. Every day, what's going on in Washington just gets worse and worse and worse. We need to make sure that we take control of the Congress in November.
Yeah. Hey, before we go, talk about your Facebook page. Do you have a website? The Blount County Conservative Sentinel, is that what?
So yeah, I have a Facebook page, Blount County Conservative Sentinel, and I also have a website where I blog called Misrule of Law. So you have rule of law, well, this is misrule of law, and I blog about a lot of different things, but one of the things I blog about is Tennessee, and I have a series called Trouble in Paradise, ? And I have blogged about my write-in election, both before the election and after the election, but I also talk about other things going on in Tennessee. So your listeners might be interested in, who are on social media, checking out the Blount County Conservative Sentinel, and also take a look at my blog, Misrule of Law.
Yep. All right, Mark. Well, I appreciate you joining me and taking the opportunity to tell your story, and I'll do my best to help share that and get light to it. And hopefully we'll have a representative or a senator have enough guts to ask for an opinion by the Attorney General. I mean, even one that's going to leave office should be able to say, hey, this is worth looking at. And so they won't be scared to death of it. But we know how the party influence works, and committee leadership positions and stuff works. So they're all eyeballing that. They don't want to rock the boat. So, but we'll keep hoping and praying for you, man, and hope that it works out for you.
Okay, thank you very much.
And guys, if you can, follow me on Facebook and on Rumble and YouTube. Just look for Charles Cook and you'll find me. And I thank you for joining us. And please share this video. This is information that can affect anybody in their county trying to run for office and make a difference. So if it can happen to Mark, it can happen to any of us. So with that, good day, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you.